and aspect such as our venerable grand dames would recoil from as absolutely disreputable, and Madame Reuter's jolly face bore evidence that she was no exception to the rule of her country. There was a twinkle and leer in her left eye; her right she kept habitually half shut, which I thought very odd indeed. After several vain attempts to comprehend the motives of these two droll old creatures for inviting me to join them at their goûter, I at last fairly gave it up, and resigning myself to inevitable mystification, I sat and looked first at one, then at the other, taking care meantime to do justice to the confitures, cakes, and coffee with which they amply supplied me. They too ate, and that with no delicate appetite, and having demolished a large portion of the solids, they proposed a petit verre. I declined. Not so Mesdames Pelet and Reuter. Each mixed herself what I thought rather a stiff tumbler of punch, and placing it on a stand near the stove, they drew up their chairs to that convenience, and invited me to do the same. I obeyed, and being seated fairly between them, I was thus addressed, first by Madame Pelet, then by Madame Reuter. "We will now speak of business," said Madame Pelet, and she went on to make an elaborate speech, which, being interpreted, was to the effect that she had asked for the pleasure of my company that evening, in order to give her friend Madame Reuter an opportunity of broaching an important proposal, which might turn out greatly to my advantage. "Pour vous que vous soyez sage," said Madame Reuter, "et à vrai dire, vous en avez bien l'air, take one drop of the punch," or punch, as she pronounced it. "It is an agreeable and wholesome beverage after a full meal." I bowed, but again declined it. She went on. "I feel," said she, after a solemn sip, "I feel profoundly the importance of the commission with which my dear daughter has entrusted me, for you are aware, monsieur, that it is my daughter who directs the establishment in the next house." "Ah, I thought it was yourself, madame." Though, indeed, at that moment I recollected that it was called Mademoiselle, not Madame Reuter's pensionnat. "I? Oh, no. I manage the house and look after the servants, as my friend Madame Pelet does for monsieur her son. Nothing more." "Ah, you thought I gave lessons in class, did you?" And she laughed loud and long, as though the idea tickled her fancy amazingly. "Madame is in the wrong to laugh," I observed. "If she does not give lessons, I am sure it is not because she cannot." And I whipped out a white pocket-handkerchief and wafted it with a French grace past my nose, bowing at the same time. "Quel charmant jeune homme!" murmured Madame Pelet in a low voice. Madame Reuter, being less sentimental, as she was Flamand and not French, only laughed again. "You are a dangerous person, I fear," said she. "If you can forge compliments at that rate, Zoraide will positively be afraid of you. But, if you're good, I will keep your secret, and not tell her how well you can flatter. Now, listen to what sort of a proposal she makes to you. She has heard that you are an excellent professor, and as she wishes to get the very best masters for her school, car Zoraide fait tout comme une reine, c'est une véritable maîtresse femme, she has commissioned me to step over this afternoon and sound Madame Pelet as to the possibility of engaging you. Zoraide is a wary general. She never advances without first examining well her ground. I don't think she would be pleased if she knew I had already disclosed her intentions to you. She did not order me to go so far, but I thought there would be no harm in letting you into the secret, and Madame Pelet was of the same opinion. Take care, however, you don't betray either of us to Zoraide, to my daughter, I mean. She is so discreet and circumspect herself. She cannot understand that one should find a pleasure in gossiping a little." "Ah, c'est absolument comme mon fils," cried Madame Pelet. "All the world is changed since our girlhood," rejoined the other. "Young people have such old heads now.
But to return, monsieur. Madame Pelet will mention the subject of your giving lessons in my daughter's establishment to her son, and he will speak to you. And then tomorrow you will step over to our house and ask to see my daughter. And you will introduce the subject as if the first intimation of it had reached you from Monsieur Pelet himself. And be sure you never mention my name, for I would not displease Zoraide on any account." "Bien, bien," interrupted I, for all this chatter and circumlocution began to bore me very much. "I will consult Monsieur Pelet, and the thing shall be settled as you desire. Good evening, mesdames. I am infinitely obliged to you." "Comment? Vous vous en allez déjà?" exclaimed Madame Pelet. "Prenez encore quelque chose, monsieur. Une pomme cuite, des biscuits, encore une tasse de café." "Merci, merci, madame. Au revoir." And I backed at last out of the apartment. Having regained my own room, I set myself to turn over in my mind the incident of the evening. It seemed a queer affair altogether, and queerly managed. The two old women had made quite a little intricate mess of it. Still I found that the uppermost feeling in my mind on the subject was one of satisfaction. In the first place, it would be a change to give lessons in another seminary, and then to teach young ladies would be an occupation so interesting. To be admitted at all into a ladies' boarding school would be an incident so new in my life. Besides, thought I, as I glanced at the boarded window, I shall now at last see the mysterious garden. I shall gaze both on the angels and their Eden. End of chapter 8.